In 1979, Steve Jobs walked into a research lab in Palo Alto and saw something that felt impossible. A computer with windows, icons, folders, and a mouse you could move across a desk. It looked like the future. But the strangest part was this. The company that owned it didn't seem to understand what it had. The people in that room had helped build the future. But the person who seemed to understand it best didn't work for them. That company was Xerox, one of the richest and most powerful companies in America. Inside its research lab, Xerox PARC, engineers had built many of the ideas that would define modern computing: the graphical interface, networked personal computers, laser printing, and the desktop metaphor. But Xerox didn't become Apple. It didn't become Microsoft. It didn't become the company that put a computer on every desk. Instead, it watched others take the future it had helped invent. This is the story of one of the greatest missed opportunities in Silicon Valley history. To understand just how stunning Xerox's failure was, you first need to understand how dominant they were. In 1959, Xerox introduced the Model 914, the world's first plain paper photocopier. Before the 914, copying a document was slow, messy, and expensive. It involved chemicals, special paper, and time. Then Xerox changed everything. You put in a document, pressed a button, and seconds later, an exact copy came out. In offices across America, it felt like magic. Fortune magazine called it the most successful product ever marketed in America. And for Xerox, that was just the beginning. The 914 was so profitable that Xerox essentially had a license to print money. Companies leased the machines and paid per copy. Every document copied meant more revenue. Every office became a customer. Every page became a tiny stream of profit. By 1968, Xerox had crossed $1 billion in annual revenue. By 1972, they were worth more than Ford Motor Company. Their stock, nicknamed the Document on Wall Street, had risen 12,000% in a single decade. They weren't just a company, they were a verb. Xerox it meant copy it, in every office, in every country. That kind of dominance is almost impossible to imagine. But Peter McCullough, Xerox's CEO, understood something dangerous. The company could not survive forever on photocopiers alone. So, in 1970, he made a bold decision. He would build the greatest research laboratory in the world, far from Xerox's conservative headquarters in Rochester, New York. He would place it in Palo Alto, California, and recruit some of the most brilliant minds in computer science with one instruction: invent the future. He called the lab PARC. What happened inside Xerox PARC between 1970 and 1975 is one of the most remarkable bursts of technological invention in history. The engineers at PARC didn't think like a normal corporate research team. They weren't trying to make photocopiers slightly faster or slightly cheaper. They were imagining computing from scratch, as if computers had never existed before. The centerpiece was the Alto, a prototype personal computer unlike anything that had come before. Most computers in 1972 were massive machines used by experts. They lived in special rooms. They required typed commands. To most people, they were intimidating, cold, and impossible to understand. The Alto was different. It sat on a desk. It had a screen. And on that screen, instead of endless lines of text, it displayed a graphical user interface, windows, icons, folders, and a desktop. It turned information into something visual, something human, something ordinary people could understand. To interact with this interface, PARC refined and integrated the mouse, a small device you could move across your desk. Where you moved it, a cursor moved on screen. You could point at things and click them. Today, that sounds obvious. In 1972, it was science fiction.
So I'd like to set up a file. So I tell the machine, all right, output to a file. and it says, well, I need a name. I'll give it a name. I'll say it's sample file. And I'll say, please output it. It says it did. And then it comes back automatically with an origin statement or header telling me the name of the file and the date and the time and who established it. And thereafter I can always do something. I can ask for the status of a file and it'll tell me that information. Very small file now, owned by me, last written by me very shortly ago, etc. and other interesting data in there. So we've seen how we can start with a blank piece of paper and go to developing a file. This file has one statement with a few words in it. Let's make more statements. I'll say copy that statement.
The original mouse had been developed years earlier at SRI, but inside PARC, it became part of a complete vision for personal computing. PARC also created Ethernet, the technology that allowed computers to connect in a local network. They pioneered laser printing. They developed WYSIWYG word processing. And through Smalltalk, they helped define the style of object-oriented programming that would influence modern software for decades. By 1975, the Xerox Alto was running. It had a desktop, draggable windows, a word processor, email, networking, laser printing. The modern office computer, essentially complete, was sitting inside a lab in Palo Alto. All Xerox had to do was take it. In 1979, Xerox invested $1 million in Apple before its IPO. As part of that relationship, Steve Jobs and a group of Apple engineers were allowed to visit Xerox PARC. What they saw there didn't come out of nowhere. Apple was already thinking about more visual, user-friendly computers, but the visit changed the urgency. At PARC, Jobs saw the Alto. He saw windows, menus, icons, the mouse, and a new way of interacting with machines. No command lines, no cryptic instructions, just movement, images, and direct control. For Jobs, the demonstration was not just impressive, it was obvious. He was looking at a computer ordinary people could understand, and that was the strange part. Xerox showed it almost like a laboratory curiosity. Something interesting, something experimental, something for researchers. Jobs saw something else. He saw a product. He saw a revolution. He saw the future of personal computing sitting on a desk, waiting for someone brave enough to sell it. Xerox had spent years building the pieces, but Jobs understood the story those pieces were telling.
I had 3 or 4 people who kept bugging me that I ought to get my rear over to Xerox PARC and see what they were doing. And so I finally did. I went over there, and they were very kind, and they showed me what they were working on. I was so blinded by the first thing they showed me, which was the graphical user interface. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever seen in my life. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this someday. It was obvious.
Apple didn't simply photocopy the Alto. Its engineers redesigned, simplified, and commercialized the ideas. But the inspiration was undeniable. A few years later came the Lisa. Then, in 1984, the Macintosh. And suddenly, the future Xerox had demonstrated in a lab was being sold to the world by someone else. Here is the question that every business school student eventually asks. How could a company this smart throw it all away? The answer isn't stupidity. It's something more subtle and far more dangerous. Comfort. Xerox's photocopier division was a cash machine. A single high-end machine could cost $50,000, and the company collected recurring revenue on every copy made. The margins were extraordinary. The executives who ran this business had no incentive, financial, cultural, or personal, to invest in something that might replace it. Why risk the future when the present is making you rich? That was the trap. When PARC engineers traveled to Xerox's headquarters in Rochester to present their work, the reaction was polite but distant. The executives saw people playing with computers on desks. But Xerox made photocopiers. Xerox sold to offices. Xerox made money every time paper moved through a machine. To management, personal computers felt like someone else's business. There was also a deep cultural disconnect. PARC was full of unconventional engineers in California who thought about computing philosophically. Rochester was full of conservative executives in suits who thought about quarterly earnings. They almost literally did not speak the same language. Xerox did eventually try. In 1981, they released the Xerox Star, a workstation built on everything PARC had invented. It was impressive. It was powerful. It was ahead of its time. It was also priced at $16,500, roughly 3 times the cost of a new car. They sold a few thousand units. The Macintosh launched 3 years later at $2,495 and sold hundreds of thousands in its first year.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
The innovators had built the future. The managers had locked it behind a price tag nobody would pay. The lesson is not that Xerox was stupid. That would be too simple. Xerox had some of the most brilliant engineers of the 20th century. The people at PARC saw things decades before the rest of the world understood them. The real lesson is more uncomfortable. Invention is not enough. You can discover the future and still lose it. You can have the best engineers, the best ideas, and the best technology, and still fail if your company is too comfortable to change. Xerox was so successful at photocopiers that it struggled to imagine a world beyond photocopiers. And by the time that world arrived, Apple, Microsoft, and others were already building it. That is the danger of success. It makes the present feel permanent. It makes the money you are already making seem more important than the world that is coming next. Xerox didn't fail because it couldn't see the future. It failed because when the future appeared on its own screen, it looked away. Xerox didn't just miss the future. It helped invent it, and then it let someone else sell it.
And so they just grabbed defeat from the greatest victory in the computer industry. Xerox could have owned the entire computer industry today.
If you made it to the end, thank you. Subscribe for what comes next. There are many more stories like this one.